The day we decided to drive across the country started with a joke. Bruce tossed a crumpled road atlas onto my kitchen table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Pick a direction." I laughed. "I'm serious. You're holding a paper map in 2026. It builds character." "No," I said. "It builds confusion." He ignored me, flattening the map with both hands. Bright blue highways stretched from coast to coast, tiny towns I'd never heard of scattered between mountains, deserts, and endless green patches. "Come on, Harrison. We've spent 3 years talking about taking a real road trip. We finally graduated. We both have jobs that don't start for another month. We're 24. 25, I corrected. He pointed a finger at me. Exactly. 25. Old enough to stop saying, maybe someday. Bruce had always been like that. He made impossible ideas sound practical simply because he believed them hard enough. When we met in college, I thought he'd be exhausting. Instead, he became my best friend. We were complete opposites. I planned everything. Bruce planned nothing. I carried portable chargers, first aid kits, extra batteries, and emergency snacks. Bruce once drove 40 miles with his fuel light on because he felt lucky. Somehow, together, we balanced each other. "So?" he asked. I folded my arms. "You actually want to do this?" "I already requested vacation." "You what?" "I knew you'd say yes eventually." "I didn't say yes." "You will." I sighed. "I hate that you know me." "I know." He grinned. That stupid grin had gotten him out of more trouble than I could count. I looked around my apartment. My life suddenly felt small. Same coffee shop. Same grocery store. Same gym. Same streets I'd driven 1,000 times. Maybe Bruce was right. Maybe waiting for the perfect moment was just another way of never leaving. I reached over the table. Closed my eyes. Dropped my finger onto the map. Bruce leaned in dramatically. "Montana." I opened one eye. "Seriously?" He burst out laughing. "That's actually kind of perfect. It literally couldn't be farther." "Exactly." I looked at him for a long second. Then I smiled. "When do we leave?" 3 days later, Bruce pulled into my apartment complex driving the oldest SUV I'd ever trusted with my life. Barely. The thing rattled before it even stopped. Paint faded. One mirror held together with silver tape. A bumper sticker that simply read, "No bad days." I stared. "This is our transportation?" He climbed out proudly. "Meet Betsy. Betsy looks tired. She has personality. She has rust. Rust is personality." I rubbed my forehead. "You checked the engine, right?" "Mostly." "Bruce." "I changed the oil." "When?" "Recently." "What does recently mean?" He looked toward the sky. "This year." "Oh my God!" He laughed so hard he had to lean against the driver's door. "You worry too much. And you don't worry enough. Exactly why we're friends." I couldn't argue with that. By noon, everything I owned for the next month fit into 2 duffel bags. Bruce brought one backpack. "That's it. I'll buy stuff if I need it." "You packed 1 pair of shoes." "I'm wearing them." "What if they get wet?" "They'll dry." "What if they fall apart?" "I'll buy shoes." I stared. "You live like a raccoon." "Efficient." We loaded the SUV. Bruce immediately connected his phone to the speakers. Classic rock exploded through the parking lot. "Road trip rules," he announced. "Oh no. No complaining about music. I already hate this. No hotels unless absolutely necessary." "Excuse me?" "We camp when possible." "I absolutely never agreed to that." "We're making memories." "We're making poor decisions." He ignored me. "Also," he pointed dramatically, "no GPS unless we're completely lost." "I hate every rule you've made." "I know. And somehow you're still in charge." "Exactly." By the time we crossed the state line, something strange happened. The pressure I'd been carrying for months, work, bills, future, responsibilities, it all started shrinking in the rearview mirror. Bruce rolled every window down. Warm summer air rushed through the SUV. Fields stretched forever on both sides. No deadlines. No emails. No schedules. Just miles. "So," Bruce said. "So? What are you hoping happens?" I looked out the window. "What do you mean?" "This trip. What do you want from it?" Nobody had asked me that. Not really. I don't know. Think. I watched telephone poles blur past. "I guess." I hesitated. "I want to feel like something's changing." Bruce nodded slowly. "I get that. What about you?" He smiled, but this time it wasn't his usual loud, fearless smile. "I think." He drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. "I'm trying to figure out where home is." That surprised me. "You already have one." He shook his head. "My parents moved." "I know." "The apartment's gone." "I know." "My college lease ended." "Yeah. I've spent my whole life leaving places." His voice had gotten quieter. "I just want somewhere that feels permanent." For a while neither of us spoke. The highway hummed beneath us. Eventually I smiled. "You know." "What?" "You sound deep for someone who packed one t-shirt." "I packed two." "That's somehow worse." He laughed. "There he is." "Who?" "My Harrison." "What does that mean?" "You only make fun of me when you're comfortable." "I make fun of you constantly." "Exactly." That first evening, we stopped at a tiny roadside diner somewhere neither of us could pronounce. There couldn't have been more than 20 people living in the town. The waitress called everyone Han. Bruce somehow learned 3 customers' life stories before our food arrived. Meanwhile, I watched him. I'd known him for nearly 7 years. I'd seen him stressed before finals, laughing until he cried, heartbroken after bad breakups, half asleep during early classes. But something about seeing him outside our normal lives, outside routines, made him seem different, lighter, like the version of himself I'd always known had been hiding underneath responsibilities. He caught me looking. "What?" "Nothing." "You smiled." "I did not." "You absolutely did." "I was thinking." "Dangerous." "I was thinking," I admitted. "I've never actually traveled with you. We literally lived together sophomore year." "That's different." "How?" "I always knew where we were going." Bruce looked out the diner window, then back at me. "You nervous?" "A little." "Good. Good? The best stories start with someone being nervous." I laughed. "You really believe that?" "I do." He picked up his milkshake. "Here's to getting lost." I clinked my glass against his. "Here's to finding something worth coming home with." For just a second, neither of us looked away. Then Bruce smiled again. The easy smile I'd known for years. And somehow, it felt different. Not bigger. Not smaller. Just different. I couldn't explain why. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought we were just 2 best friends driving across America. I had no idea that somewhere between that tiny diner and the thousands of miles waiting ahead, everything I believed about us was already beginning to change. The next morning, Bruce woke me up by throwing a granola bar at my face. I caught it on instinct. "What the?" "Rise and shine." I looked at my phone. 6:07 a.m. "I'm going to kill you. We've got mountains to see. It's barely daylight." "Exactly." I buried my face back into the motel pillow. "We're supposed to be on vacation." "We are." "Vacation involves sleeping." Bruce pulled the curtains open. Sunlight flooded the room. "Vacation also involves not wasting daylight." "You've become unbearable." "I've always been unbearable." Unfortunately, he was right. 40 minutes later we were back on the road. The highway slowly gave way to winding roads surrounded by forests that seemed endless. Morning mist floated between the trees, and every few miles Bruce insisted on pulling over because the view is different. The last view looked exactly like this. It absolutely did not. There are trees. Different trees. They're pine trees. These are emotional pine trees. I laughed despite myself. You really can sell anything. I should have gone into marketing. You would have been fired. They couldn't fire me. They absolutely could. I'd charm my way back. I believe that. Bruce had a way of making strangers feel like they'd known him for years. Gas station cashiers, hotel clerks, random hikers, waitresses. It didn't matter. People liked him almost immediately. Sometimes I wondered what that felt like. I'd always been quieter, more careful, more likely to observe than jump into conversations. Bruce never seemed afraid of taking up space. Around noon we stopped at a scenic overlook. There were only a handful of people there. An older couple taking pictures. A family with 2 kids chasing each other. A guy sitting alone on a bench sketching the mountains. Bruce climbed onto the wooden fence despite the sign telling people not to. Bruce. What? Get down. I'm fine. The sign literally says. I know what it says. You never listen to signs. They're suggestions. They're rules. They're optimistic suggestions. I shook my head. One day, I thought, this man is going to give me a heart attack. He stretched his arms toward the valley below. This is insane. I stepped beside him. The mountains rolled into the distance forever. Layers of blue fading into the horizon. Wind pushed through the trees below us. For several minutes neither of us spoke. You ever think about how small we are? Bruce asked. I try not to. I do. He kept looking ahead. It kind of makes everything feel less scary. How? If the world's this big. He shrugged. Maybe making mistakes isn't that big of a deal. I looked over at him. You've been thinking a lot lately. Road trips do that. They do? They force you to sit with your own brain. I'm beginning to understand why you usually keep music on. He laughed. Exactly. That afternoon, Betsy decided she wanted attention. About 30 miles from the nearest town, the engine coughed once. Then again. Bruce frowned. Did you hear that? I definitely heard that. The SUV lost power. Bruce. I'm aware. We're slowing down. I noticed. 5 seconds later we were parked on the shoulder. Silence. Bruce turned the key. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. I slowly looked at him. Recently? He winced. Don't. You said you checked everything? I did. You said this year. I regret saying that. I leaned back against the seat. We're stranded. For the moment. In the middle of nowhere. Technically. There is literally no town. He opened his door. I'm going to look. At what? The engine. Do you know anything about engines? I know where the hood opens. I laughed so hard I couldn't stop. Bruce stared at me. Are you laughing? I absolutely am. Our car died. I know. And you're laughing. You finally found something you can't charm. He pointed at me. I don't appreciate this. Oh, I'm having the time of my life. 20 minutes later we were still stranded. Bruce admitted defeat. I officially have no idea. I figured that out when you poked the battery. I thought maybe it would help. It did not. No. We sat on the hood together waiting for roadside assistance. No cell service. No traffic. Just endless sky. Bruce tossed small rocks toward the empty road. I'm sorry. I looked over. For what? I dragged you into this. You dragged me onto a cross-country adventure. And immediately broke the car. That's on brand. He laughed quietly. I really am an idiot sometimes. I nudged his shoulder. Yeah? You're also my favorite idiot. He smiled without looking at me. I'll take that. The silence afterward felt comfortable. Not awkward. Just easy. The kind of silence only happened after years of friendship. Eventually Bruce spoke again. You know what scares me? Besides mechanics? He chuckled. Besides that. I waited. One day. He stared down the empty highway. We're going to stop doing stuff like this. What do you mean? We'll get busy. Probably. Careers. Yeah. Families. Maybe. Different cities. His voice had become quieter. And then one day we'll realize 5 years passed. I understood exactly what he meant. Life had a way of moving without asking permission. You think that'll happen? I hope not. I looked at him. So don't let it. He smiled. You make that sound easy. It's probably not. No. But some people are worth making time for. Bruce finally looked at me. Our eyes met. For just a second. Something unreadable crossed his face. Not sadness. Not happiness. Just something I couldn't place. Before I could think about it, a pickup truck appeared in the distance. An older man stopped to help us. Half an hour later, Betsy was running again thanks to a loose battery cable and someone who actually knew what he was doing. Bruce tried paying him. The man refused. Just help somebody else someday. After he drove away, Bruce leaned against the SUV. People are good. Some are. No. He smiled. More than we think. That night we camped beside a quiet lake. Bruce insisted. I complained. Then admitted it was beautiful. The water reflected thousands of stars. No city lights. No traffic. Just the sound of insects and gentle waves reaching the shore. We sat beside a small campfire eating instant noodles from metal cups. This is awful. Bruce took another bite. It's amazing. It tastes like warm cardboard. It's adventure flavored. That's not a flavor. It is tonight. I laughed again. You know. Bruce poked at the fire with a stick. I don't think I've seen you laugh this much since college. That's because you usually annoy me. I still annoy you. You do. So what's different? I looked across the lake. I don't know. The answer came before I could stop it. I think I forgot how good it feels to slow down. Bruce nodded. We're always rushing towards something. Exactly. And then one day you realize you never looked around. The fire crackled between us. A cool breeze rolled across the water. Bruce wrapped his hoodie tighter around himself. You cold? A little. I reached into my bag. You packed another blanket? I pack responsibly. He accepted it with a grateful smile. See? I said. This is why you keep me around. I keep you around because somebody has to stop me from accidentally driving into Canada. You almost did once. I was following my instincts. Your instincts have terrible navigation. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his noodles. The sound echoed across the quiet lake. I found myself smiling before I even realized it. Watching him laugh had always been contagious. Maybe that was why being around Bruce never felt complicated. Everything with him was simple. Or at least, that's what I still believed. As the fire burned lower, neither of us seemed eager to go to sleep. We just kept talking. About old professors. Embarrassing college memories. People we'd lost touch with. Dreams we'd never told anyone else. Somewhere after midnight, Bruce looked up at the stars and quietly said, I'm really glad it's you. I frowned. What? This trip. He smiled without taking his eyes off the sky. I couldn't have done it with anyone else. Something warm settled quietly in my chest. I feel the same. Neither of us said anything after that. The lake remained perfectly still. The fire slowly faded into glowing embers. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that simple conversation stayed with me long after we crawled into our separate tents. Because for the first time since we'd left home, I caught myself wondering whether this trip was changing more than just our scenery. We left the lake just after sunrise. The tents were still damp with morning dew, and Bruce somehow looked completely awake despite getting maybe 5 hours of sleep. I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. "You look terrible," he said cheerfully. "I feel terrible. That's the spirit. You've confused suffering with character development." He grinned. "That's because suffering usually makes the best stories." I rolled my sleeping bag tighter. "You say that because you're never the one organizing everything afterward." "True. You just create chaos. And you beautifully clean it up." I hate how accurate that is. An hour later we were back on the road. The mountains slowly disappeared behind us, replaced by wide open plains that stretched farther than I thought land should be allowed to stretch. Bruce drove with one hand resting on the steering wheel, humming quietly along with the playlist we'd somehow managed to agree on. Neither of us talked much. Not because anything was wrong. Because silence had become comfortable. The kind that doesn't need filling. Around noon, Bruce suddenly pointed toward a weathered billboard. "World's largest prairie dog." "No." He glanced at me. "No? We are absolutely not stopping. But it's the world's largest prairie dog. It's a statue. It's history. It's fiberglass. It's culture. It's a tourist trap. It's destiny." I sighed dramatically. "I already know you've decided. I turned on the blinker 3 sentences ago." 20 minutes later we stood in front of a 30-foot prairie dog wearing a cowboy hat. Bruce looked genuinely impressed. "This is incredible. This is ridiculous. It's both." A little gift shop sat beside the statue. Bruce disappeared inside. He came back wearing a baseball cap with the prairie dog printed across the front. "Oh no." "What?" "You're buying it." "I'm absolutely buying it. You already own 6 hats. I don't own this one." "You have no self-control." "I have excellent priorities." He bought matching keychains too. "For memories." "We already have memories. These are physical memories. They're plastic. They're emotional plastic." I laughed. Again. It felt like I'd been laughing more in the last 3 days than I had during the previous 6 months. That afternoon the weather changed without warning. Dark clouds rolled across the sky. Wind picked up. The first raindrops hit the windshield just as Bruce muttered, "That doesn't look good." 5 minutes later the rain became a wall. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Bruce tightened both hands around the wheel. "I can't see." "Take the next exit." "I don't know where it goes." "I don't care." Lightning flashed somewhere ahead. The thunder came almost immediately afterward. Bruce slowed even more. "There." I pointed toward a small sign. A tiny roadside motel appeared through the rain. We pulled in just as the storm unleashed everything it had. Rain hammered against the roof so loudly we had to raise our voices. Bruce looked out the windshield. "Guess we're staying." I don't think Betsy had much choice. The motel looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 90s. The owner handed us one room. Bruce looked at the key. "Only one?" The woman shrugged. "Last vacancy?" I looked at Bruce. He looked back at me. Neither of us said anything. "We'll survive," I finally said. "Yeah." It wasn't a big deal. We'd shared hotel rooms before during college trips. 1 room. 2 beds. Simple. At least. That was the plan. Bruce opened the door. Then stopped. "Well?" I looked past him. There was 1 bed. 1. Queen-sized. I slowly closed my eyes. "Bruce. I didn't book this." "I know. You think she'll have another room?" "The parking lot's full." He sighed. "I can sleep on the floor." I immediately shook my head. "No. I'm serious." "So am I. I've slept on worse." "So have I." We stood there for a moment. Then Bruce laughed. "I cannot believe this is happening. It's 1 night." "I know. We're adults." "We are. It's just a bed." Correct. So why are we standing here like we're negotiating a peace treaty? I couldn't help laughing. I honestly don't know. Eventually we walked inside. The room was clean. Small. A single chair by the window. One nightstand. One bed. Bruce dropped his backpack onto the floor. I'm taking a shower first. Go ahead. The rain continued pounding outside. I wandered toward the window while Bruce disappeared into the bathroom. The storm was beautiful. Gray sky. Trees bending in the wind. Water running across the parking lot. For the first time since leaving home, everything felt wonderfully disconnected from the rest of the world. No phone signal. No internet. Just weather. A knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door. The motel owner stood there holding 2 steaming mugs. Power goes out sometimes during storms, she said. Thought you boys might want some coffee. Thank you. She smiled warmly. You 2 brothers? I smiled automatically. No. Friends? For a long time. She nodded. I could tell. Really? You don't have to think around each other. She said it so casually. Then she walked away. I stood there for another second before closing the door. You don't have to think around each other. It was a strange way to describe friendship. But somehow, it fit. Bruce came out of the bathroom drying his hair with a towel. You talking to somebody? The owner. What did she want? Cough. The lights went out. Everything became dark. Bruce sighed. Well, I laughed. She warned us. Rain continued outside. The emergency lamp beside the bed flickered on, filling the room with soft yellow light. Bruce picked up one of the mugs. At least we have coffee. We sat on the floor near the window, watching lightning flash across the horizon. This is actually kind of nice. It is. Bruce wrapped both hands around his mug. You know. What? I haven't thought about work once today. Me either. I needed this more than I realized. So did I. He looked at me thoughtfully. You've seemed happier. I blinked. Really? Yeah. When? Yesterday. And today? He smiled slightly. You're smiling with your eyes again. My eyes smile? They used to. I frowned. What does that even mean? It means. He searched for the right words. When we first met, you looked curious about everything. I listened quietly. Then after graduation. He shrugged. Life kind of happened. I guess. You stopped looking around. I stared into my coffee. I didn't notice. I did. There wasn't any judgment in his voice. Just honesty. You've been looking around again. I smiled without meaning to. Maybe that's what road trips are for. Maybe. Another silence settled between us. Comfortable. Easy. Outside, thunder rolled across the empty plains. Inside, everything felt strangely peaceful. The power still hadn't returned when it was finally time to sleep. Bruce stood beside the bed. So. I promise I don't snore. You absolutely snore. I breathe enthusiastically. You sound like a lawn mower. He laughed. I'll stay on my side. I wasn't worried. He looked at me for a second. Then smiled. I know. We climbed into bed from opposite sides. There was plenty of room. More than enough. Still, for some reason, neither of us spoke. The storm had finally begun moving away. Rain softened into a gentle rhythm against the roof. The room was almost completely dark. You awake? Bruce asked quietly. Yeah. You ever think about how weird it is? He paused. That we've known each other almost 7 years? Sometimes. I can't really remember what life looked like before. I smiled into the darkness. I can. You can? You were the loud guy who sat behind me in economics. He laughed. And you were the guy who corrected the professor. He was wrong. He was mostly wrong. He was completely wrong. You've always been stubborn. So have you. Fair. Another pause. Then Bruce spoke again, much softer this time. I'm glad I met you. The words were simple. Honest. Without thinking, I answered just as honestly. I'm glad I met you too. Neither of us added anything else. Eventually Bruce's breathing became slow and steady. He had fallen asleep. I stayed awake a little longer, listening to the fading rain, watching faint flashes of distant lightning through the curtains, thinking about everything the motel owner had said. You don't have to think around each other. I realized she was right. Around Bruce, I never felt like I needed to pretend to be anyone else. I could be quiet, sarcastic, thoughtful, annoyed, happy. None of it ever changed the way he looked at me. The realization should have felt ordinary. Instead, for reasons I couldn't explain, it stayed with me long after I finally closed my eyes. The storm had disappeared by morning. Sunlight poured through the motel curtains as if the previous night had never happened. Bruce was already awake. Of course he was. He stood outside the room with 2 coffees when I opened the door. You've become predictable, I said. He handed one to me. I figured you'd forgive me faster with caffeine. I was never mad. You looked mad. I always look like that before coffee. I've known you long enough to recognize the difference. I took a sip. He wasn't wrong. I booked us breakfast. You booked breakfast? The diner next door. That's not booking. It sounded more responsible. I laughed. You really hate admitting when you're improvising. I prefer adapting. The diner was almost empty. A couple of truck drivers sat in one corner. An elderly woman worked on a crossword puzzle near the window. Bruce immediately started talking with the waitress while I looked over the menu. You don't even know her. I know enough. You've been here 30 seconds. Exactly. 5 minutes later he somehow knew she'd owned the diner for 23 years, had 3 grandchildren, and wanted to retire but couldn't convince herself to sell the place. You collect people, I said after she walked away. Bruce looked confused. What? Stories. Oh. He smiled. I guess I do. You remember everything. I like knowing people. He stirred cream into his coffee. Everyone has something interesting if you wait long enough. I looked around the diner. I've never been good at that. That's because you listen differently. What does that mean? You listen for information. And you? I listen for feelings. I blinked. I've never thought about it. I have. That answer surprised me. You've thought about how I listen? Bruce shrugged. I notice things. It wasn't a strange thing for him to say. Bruce always noticed things. When I skipped meals because I was stressed. When I laughed to avoid answering personal questions. When I needed quiet instead of advice. He noticed all of it. I just hadn't realized how closely he paid attention. By late afternoon we reached a national park neither of us had originally planned to visit. Bruce insisted. Again. We're already here. It's a 2-hour hike. So? We'll be exhausted. We're already exhausted. You have an answer for everything. I do. The trail climbed steadily through forests until the trees suddenly opened onto a rocky overlook. The view stole every remaining complaint from my mouth. A river cut through the valley hundreds of feet below. Pine forests stretched toward distant cliffs. Cloud shadows drifted lazily across the landscape. Bruce quietly whistled. Worth it? I nodded. Definitely. Neither of us reached for our phones. Either of us spoke. Some places didn't need commentary. After several minutes Bruce wandered farther along the overlook. I stayed behind, sitting on a large flat rock. Watching him. He moved through the world with so much confidence. Not arrogance. Just comfort. As if every unfamiliar place deserved curiosity instead of caution. I envied that. He turned around. Caught me looking. What? I was thinking. Dangerous again. I was wondering if you've always been like this. Like what? So open. He considered the question. I wasn't. No? He sat beside me. When I was a kid. He picked up a small stone. I wanted everybody to like me. I can't imagine that changed. It did. He tossed the stone into the valley. I realized eventually that not everyone will. So I stopped trying. I looked at him. But you still talk to everyone. That's different. How? I don't need them to like me. He smiled. I just like meeting them. There was something unexpectedly vulnerable in the way he said it. What about you? I thought for a long moment. I've spent most of my life trying not to disappoint people. Bruce nodded slowly. I know. You do? You apologize when someone bumps into you. I laughed. I do not. You absolutely do. I've never noticed. I have. He leaned back on his elbows. You carry responsibility for things that aren't yours. I stared at the valley below us. Maybe. I wish you wouldn't. The sentence was quiet, almost carried away by the wind. I turned toward him. Why? Because. He hesitated. You deserve to relax sometimes. Something about the way he looked at me made it difficult to answer. So I didn't. We finished the hike just before sunset. Halfway back to the parking lot, Bruce suddenly stopped walking. What? Listen. I frowned. To what? He smiled. Exactly. I listened. No cars. No voices. No phones. Just wind moving through the trees. Birds somewhere in the distance. Leaves rustling overhead. I forgot silence could sound like this, he said. So did I. He looked strangely thoughtful. You know what I don't miss? What? Constant notifications. I turned mine off yesterday. I noticed. You noticed that too? I told you. He smiled. I noticed things. I shook my head. I think that's your superpower. He laughed. It's either that or making bad financial decisions. Definitely the second one. That evening we found another campground, this one beside a slow-moving river. The place was almost empty. Only 3 other campsites were occupied. Bruce volunteered to gather firewood while I cooked. Or, more accurately, attempted to cook. By the time he returned, one pan was smoking. What happened? I may have underestimated how quickly pasta burns. How? I don't want to talk about it. He burst into laughter. I leave for 15 minutes. I was distracted. By what? I looked toward the river. I don't know. That wasn't entirely true. Lately I'd been thinking more than usual. About work. About home. About the strange feeling that something inside me had quietly shifted since we started driving. Bruce rescued dinner with surprising competence. I didn't know you could cook. I can't. This says otherwise. I watched a lot of cooking videos. Instead of actually cooking? I absorbed knowledge. You absorb confidence. He grinned. Same thing. We ate beside the fire while darkness slowly settled over the campground. At one point, Bruce disappeared into the SUV. When he came back, he carried a small disposable camera. I stared. You bought that? At the gift shop yesterday. Why? So we stopped taking perfect pictures. I looked confused. He handed it to me. Digital photos are endless. I turned the little camera over in my hands. This only has 27 pictures. Exactly. So every photo matters. I smiled. I actually like that. I knew you would. He sat beside me. Take the first one. I aimed the camera at him. He immediately made the most ridiculous face imaginable. I lowered it. I'm not wasting film on that. You absolutely should. No. You'll regret it. I laughed so hard my hands shook. Then I pressed the shutter. Click. Bruce smiled. A masterpiece. My grandchildren will ask why I photographed a raccoon pretending to be human. I'll be honored. I handed him the camera. My turn. He raised it. Instead of taking the picture immediately, he looked at me. Longer than necessary. What? Nothing. Bruce. You smile differently now. There you go again. I'm serious. He slowly pressed the shutter. Click. What changed? I asked. He lowered the camera. I don't know. His voice was almost thoughtful. But, he hesitated. You look happier than you did before we left. I looked into the fire. Maybe he was right. Maybe somewhere between broken cars, endless highways, roadside diners, and quiet nights under unfamiliar skies, I'd started remembering a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. The strange part wasn't that Bruce noticed. The strange part was realizing how much it mattered that he did. Long after we crawled into our tents that night, I lay awake listening to the river. For the first time since the trip began, the destination no longer felt like the important part. Somehow, the person beside me on the journey mattered far more than the miles still ahead. By the second week, the road had stopped feeling unfamiliar. Somehow, it had become normal. Wake up. Coffee. Pack the bags. Argue about music. Drive until one of us spotted something interesting. Repeat. It was the kind of routine that didn't feel repetitive. Every highway led somewhere new. Every town looked different. Every day felt slightly unpredictable. Bruce loved that. I was starting to understand why. Pull over. I looked at him. We literally stopped 15 minutes ago. I know. So why are we stopping again? He pointed toward a hand-painted sign. Local farmers market. We need peaches. We absolutely do not need peaches. You haven't even seen the peaches. I don't need to. They're local. They're fruit. They're an experience. I sighed. You've somehow turned grocery shopping into tourism. It already was. 10 minutes later we were walking between small wooden stalls filled with homemade jams, fresh bread, flowers, vegetables, and fruit. Bruce greeted every vendor like an old friend. By the time we reached the last stand, someone had convinced him to try homemade honey. Then another person handed him fresh apple cider. You realize they're marketing to you. Bruce smiled. I know. And it's working. I know. I laughed. I've never seen anyone so happy buying vegetables. They're excellent vegetables. You don't even cook. I support local agriculture. We bought far more food than we needed. As we walked back toward Betsy, Bruce balanced a paper bag under one arm. You know what's weird? What? I don't miss my phone anymore. I checked mine. Still no signal. I noticed. When was the last time you looked at yours? I thought about it. Yesterday? He smiled. I think we're detoxing. I think we're finally paying attention. He nodded. I like this version of us. Something about that sentence lingered. This version? Yeah. No schedules. No rushing. No pretending we're too busy. He looked ahead as we reached the SUV. I forgot what uninterrupted conversations feel like. So did I. Later that afternoon we reached a small town famous for an old railroad bridge. Neither of us cared much about trains. We stopped anyway. The bridge overlooked a river cutting through a deep canyon. Tourists wandered around taking pictures. Bruce leaned against the railing. Remember sophomore year? Which disaster? The camping trip. I laughed immediately. You mean when you forgot the tent? I forgot part of the tent. You forgot the poles. The fabric was there. The fabric isn't the important part. It became a blanket. It became a very expensive blanket. He grinned. You still came. I spent the night sleeping under a picnic table. You survived. I nearly froze. But you survived. I shook my head. You've been dragging me into ridiculous situations for 7 years. And yet, he smiled. You're still here. I question that decision regularly. No, you don't. No. I admitted it. I don't. For a moment we simply watched the river below. Then Bruce quietly asked, "Why?" I looked at him. "Why what? Why are you still here?" The question caught me off guard. I mean, he searched for words. "You've had every reason to get tired of me." I laughed softly. "Bruce, I'm serious." "So am I." I leaned against the railing beside him. "You've also had every reason to get tired of me." I asked first. I thought about it. Really thought. "You've always made life feel." I stopped. "Bigger." He stayed quiet. "I overthink everything." I know. You don't. I know. You've talked me into experiences I'd never have chosen. And? I smiled. I've never regretted any of them. Bruce looked down at the river. His expression softened. You know. His voice was almost lost beneath the sound of rushing water. That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. That evening we booked a cabin instead of camping. It wasn't fancy. Just one room. Wooden walls. 2 rocking chairs on the porch. A fireplace. The owner apologized. "I'm afraid the second bedroom flooded yesterday." Bruce looked at me. I looked back. We're becoming professionals at this. This time the cabin had 2 mattresses. On the floor. Side by side. Bruce laughed. Progress. It technically counts. After dinner we sat outside watching the sunset disappear behind the trees. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Neither of us had spoken for several minutes. Finally Bruce broke the silence. "You ever think about relationships?" I blinked. "That's random." I know. "But do you?" I leaned back in the chair. "Sometimes." "What kind of person do you picture yourself with?" I wasn't expecting that question. "I don't know." "Really?" "I've never had a specific picture." He nodded slowly. "I used to." "What changed?" "I realized I cared less about what someone looked like." He paused. "And more about how they made ordinary days feel." I looked toward him. He continued watching the sunset. "I don't think big moments matter that much." "What does?" He smiled faintly. "Who makes grocery shopping fun?" I laughed. "So your soulmate sells peaches?" "Maybe. Or buys too many." "Exactly." I shook my head. "That's oddly specific." "I've had time to think." The conversation drifted somewhere else after that. Movies. Books. Music. But his answer stayed with me. Who makes ordinary days feel special? I found myself replaying it later while brushing my teeth. It was a surprisingly beautiful way to describe love. That night neither of us could sleep. Bruce lay staring at the ceiling. "You awake?" "Unfortunately. I can't stop thinking." "Dangerous." He chuckled. "I know." "What about?" He was quiet for a while. "Do you think people change?" He hesitated. "Or do they just become more themselves?" I turned onto my side. "I don't know. I've been trying to figure it out." "What brought that on?" "This trip." I waited. "I feel different." "So do I." He looked toward me. "In a good way?" "I think so." He smiled. "Me too." The cabin was almost completely dark. Moonlight slipped through the curtains. "I don't want this to end," Bruce admitted. I understood immediately. "I know." "No." He shook his head. "I mean," his voice became softer, "I'm worried everything goes back to normal." I didn't answer right away. Because I was worried about exactly the same thing. Finally I said, "Maybe normal isn't enough anymore." He turned his head toward me. Neither of us spoke. For several long seconds, the room felt strangely quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just full of something neither of us seemed ready to name. Eventually Bruce smiled. "I think this trip was exactly what I needed." I smiled back. I think it was exactly what I needed too. Neither of us realized it then. But somewhere along thousands of miles of empty highways, countless conversations, shared laughter, broken down cars, storms, campfires, and ordinary moments that somehow became unforgettable. The line between friendship and something deeper had quietly begun to blur. Neither of us had crossed it. Not yet. But for the first time, I wasn't entirely sure where it was anymore. The next morning felt different. Not because anything had happened. Nothing had. Bruce still made terrible coffee over the portable stove. I still complained about it. He still ignored me. On the surface, everything was exactly the same. But somewhere beneath the familiar rhythm, something had shifted. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the conversation the night before. Maybe it was simply spending nearly 2 weeks together without distractions. Or maybe I was finally noticing things that had always been there. You've been quiet. Bruce glanced at me from behind the wheel. I've always been quiet. Not like this. I looked out the window. Rolling hills stretched across the horizon, dotted with old wooden barns and fields glowing in the morning sun. I'm just thinking. I know. What about? I smiled. If I tell you, I'll stop thinking. That's not how thinking works. It is for me. He laughed. You've been smiling to yourself all morning. I have not. You absolutely have. I think you're imagining things. Bruce shook his head. I never imagine your expressions. You make that sound creepy. It probably is. We both laughed. The conversation moved on. But I caught him glancing toward me a few more times during the drive. Like he was trying to figure something out. Around lunchtime we reached a small coastal town. It wasn't on our route. Bruce had spotted it on an old map the night before. It says there's a lighthouse. So? I've never climbed one. You've also never milked a goat. We're not milking goats. My point exactly. He parked anyway. The town felt frozen in time. Tiny cafes. Fishing boats rocking gently in the harbor. Colorful houses facing the sea. The lighthouse stood on a rocky cliff overlooking endless blue water. Neither of us spoke as we climbed the narrow spiral staircase. The higher we went, the stronger the wind became. When we reached the top, the ocean stretched forever. Waves crashed against dark rocks below. Seagulls circled overhead. Bruce rested both hands on the railing. Wow! That single word somehow said everything. I stood beside him. The air smelled like salt. The breeze pushed against our jackets. This makes all the driving worth it. It does. He smiled without looking away from the horizon. I've been thinking. There it is again. What? Dangerous. He laughed. I know. He became quiet again. Can I ask you something? Sure. If someone had told you a month ago, he searched for the right words, that we'd be standing here right now. I nodded. What would have surprised you the most? I thought for a long moment. The miles? He shook his head. No. The places? No. I looked toward him. You. He finally turned. Me? I've known you for years. Yeah. But I struggled to explain it. I've never actually had this much uninterrupted time with you. Bruce listened without interrupting. I thought I knew everything about you. And? I didn't. A small smile appeared on his face. I could say exactly the same thing. We spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through the town. Bruce insisted we visit a tiny bookstore. I insisted we didn't have room in the SUV for more things. He bought a used novel anyway. You already have books. I don't have this one. You've become impossible. I've always been impossible. The bookstore owner wrapped the book in brown paper. You boys traveling far? Across the country, Bruce answered. The man smiled. Best way to really know someone. Bruce glanced toward me. I think he's right. I smiled politely. At the time, I wasn't sure whether he meant friendship or something else. That evening we found a quiet beach where overnight camping was allowed. The sand was cool beneath our shoes. The ocean was calm. Bruce built a small fire using driftwood. We ate sandwiches while watching the sun slowly disappear into the water. "I don't want to forget this." Bruce said it so quietly I almost missed it. "You won't." "I always think I won't." He skipped a small stone toward the waves. "Then life gets busy." I nodded. "I know. I don't want this to become one of those stories that starts with." He smiled sadly. "Remember when we used to?" His words landed harder than I expected. Because I'd been thinking exactly the same thing. "You know what scares me?" I asked. "What?" "Getting home." Bruce looked at me. "Really?" I nodded. "I've remembered how happy I can be." He stayed silent. "I'm afraid I'll forget again." The fire crackled between us. The sky slowly filled with stars. "You won't." His voice was calm. "Certain." "How do you know?" "Because." He looked directly at me. "I'll remind you." Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. Something tightened quietly inside my chest. Not uncomfortable. Just unexpected. Bruce smiled first. "I promised I'd help somebody someday." "What?" "The guy who fixed Betsy." I remembered. "Help somebody else someday." Bruce nodded. "I think he meant moments like this." I laughed softly. "You always find meaning in random conversations." "I try." "I'm glad." "So am I." Later that night the fire had almost burned out. Neither of us seemed interested in going to sleep. Bruce lay back on the sand, hands behind his head. I did the same. Above us, thousands of stars. Far brighter than anything we'd ever seen back home. "You ever think about fate?" Bruce asked. "Sometimes." "You believe in it?" I considered the question. "I believe people make choices. And sometimes those choices lead somewhere they never expected." He nodded slowly. "I like that answer. What about you?" He didn't respond immediately. Finally he smiled toward the stars. "I think some people are supposed to meet." I looked up. "And then?" "They decide what happens next." The ocean rolled gently onto the shore. Over and over. Peaceful. Steady. I realized then that I'd stopped imagining the end of the trip. Instead, without meaning to, I'd started wondering what happened after it. Not where I'd live. Not where I'd work. Just whether life would somehow still include this. Long conversations. Shared silence. Bruce laughing at his own terrible jokes. Coffee before sunrise. Getting lost on purpose. Somewhere deep inside me, a question had quietly appeared. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. But it refused to leave. What if the best part of this trip wasn't the road? What if it had been sitting beside me the entire time? I didn't say the thought out loud. Not yet. But for the first time, the possibility no longer felt impossible. The last stretch of the trip arrived much faster than either of us expected. One morning, Bruce looked at the map spread across the hood of Betsy and quietly said, "We're almost there." I stared at the red line we'd been drawing across the country with a marker. Thousands of miles behind us. Only a few hours ahead. For some reason, instead of feeling excited, I felt disappointed. Bruce noticed immediately. "You made that face." "What face?" "The one where you're pretending you're fine." "I don't have a face for that." "You absolutely do." I smiled weakly. "I just don't want it to end." His expression softened. "Yeah." That was all he said. Just, "Yeah." But somehow he understood exactly what I meant. We spent most of that morning driving along the coastline. The ocean stayed beside us for miles. Windows down. Music low enough that we could still hear the waves whenever the road curved close to the shore. Neither of us talked much. Not because there was nothing to say, Because both of us were quietly avoiding the obvious. Soon we'd reach the final destination. Soon we'd turn around. Soon real life would begin again. Bruce finally broke the silence. So, promise me something. I looked over. What? When we get home. He paused. Don't disappear. I frowned. I wasn't planning to. You know what I mean. I did. Life had a habit of filling every empty space. Work. Meetings. Bills. Appointments. Weeks became months before anyone noticed. I promise. You actually have to mean it. I do. He smiled. Good. Around noon we stopped at one final overlook. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before us. This was it. The end of the road. Bruce climbed onto a large rock overlooking the cliffs. We made it. I joined him. We actually did. For several minutes we simply stood there. Wind whipped through our jackets. The ocean crashed against the rocks below. Bruce suddenly laughed. What? You know. He looked toward the horizon. I thought this moment would feel bigger. Bigger? Like some huge ending. Instead, he smiled faintly. It just feels like another really good day. I nodded. I know exactly what you mean. He glanced sideways at me. I think that's because. He hesitated. It stopped being about the destination a while ago. My heart skipped once. Very quietly. I think you're right. We asked a tourist to take our picture. Bruce insisted. This has to be the last photo. We still have 3 pictures left. We'll use them later. The woman counted. 1. Bruce threw an arm around my shoulders. Completely naturally. Like he'd done 100 times before. Maybe he had. Except, this time it felt different. Not because of the gesture. Because of how aware I suddenly became of it. The camera clicked. The woman smiled. That's a good one. Bruce thanked her. Neither of us immediately stepped apart. Instead, we stood there for another second, looking out at the ocean. Eventually, he lowered his arm. Neither of us mentioned it. That evening, we found one last place to stay. A small cabin overlooking the water. We cooked dinner together almost without speaking. Everything had become automatic. I chopped vegetables. Bruce handled the stove. I washed dishes. He dried them. At one point we both reached for the same plate. Our hands brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. Bruce looked up first. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat. The room became strangely quiet. Then I picked up the plate. Sorry. He smiled. Don't be. Dinner continued. Conversation returned. But something inside me refused to settle. After sunset, we carried 2 chairs outside. The ocean below reflected the moonlight. Bruce leaned back. So, what are you thinking? I laughed. You first. He nodded. Fair. For several moments, he simply watched the waves. Then he quietly said, I don't think I'm the same person who left home. I turned toward him. No? He shook his head. I've spent years thinking I needed to figure everything out. And? I don't. He smiled. I just need the right people beside me. The words settled heavily between us. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking toward the ocean. Maybe that made it easier. What about you? I took a slow breath. I've been trying to answer one question all day. What question? I stared at the horizon. What exactly changed? Bruce stayed silent. Waiting. I keep telling myself it was the trip. The mountains. The ocean. The road. He nodded gently. But. I stopped. Because suddenly. I knew. It wasn't. Bruce slowly looked at me. It was you. The words escaped before I had time to stop them. Silence. Not awkward. Just impossibly still. The wind seemed quieter. The waves farther away. Bruce didn't say anything. He simply looked at me. I felt my heartbeat pounding. I don't mean. I laughed nervously. I mean. I know what you mean. His voice was calm. Too calm. I don't think you do. I think I do. Another long silence. Bruce lowered his eyes. Then quietly admitted. I've been trying very hard not to say exactly the same thing. I blinked. What? He smiled. Small. Almost uncertain. The trip changed me. He looked back up. But not because of the road. My chest tightened. I kept wondering. He laughed softly. When you started looking different. I look exactly the same. No. His smile grew warmer. You don't. Neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed capable of looking away. I think, Bruce said quietly, somewhere between the broken car. He smiled. And the night at the lake. I started noticing. I whispered. I did too. He laughed. So we've both been pretending. I guess we have. 4 days. Probably. The realization should have been awkward. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. Like we'd finally reached a destination neither of us had realized we were traveling toward. Bruce stood. Walked over to the porch railing. I joined him. The ocean stretched endlessly before us. So, he asked quietly, what happens now? I smiled. I honestly don't know. For once. For once. He laughed. I kind of like not knowing. So do I. We stood shoulder to shoulder. Not speaking. Not needing to. The road trip that had started as two best friends chasing an adventure across the country had quietly become something neither of us could have planned. Neither of us rushed to define it. Neither of us needed to. For the first time since leaving home, the future no longer felt uncertain. It simply felt open. And somehow, that was enough. The drive home felt completely different. Not because the roads had changed. Because we had. For the first time since leaving home. Neither of us felt the need to fill every silence with jokes or stories. We still laughed. Bruce still stopped for ridiculous roadside attractions. I still complained before secretly enjoying every detour. But now there was something quieter between us. Something honest. Nothing had been dramatically declared. Nothing had been rushed. We had simply admitted what had been growing somewhere between thousands of miles of highway. And strangely, that made everything feel easier. 2 days later we crossed back into our home state. Bruce slowed the SUV as the familiar road signs appeared. I don't recognize this place anymore. I smiled. You've lived here for years. I know. It looks exactly the same. He nodded. That's the weird part. I understood. Nothing around us had changed. But we had spent nearly a month seeing the world differently. That changes the way home feels. I thought I'd be excited to get back, Bruce admitted. Aren't you? I am. He looked at me for a second. Because you're coming back too. I looked out the window before he could notice the smile that appeared on my face. When we finally pulled into my apartment complex, neither of us moved. The engine was off. Betsy ticked quietly as it cooled. Our bags sat in the back exactly where we packed them weeks earlier. So, Bruce said. So, we're home. We are. Neither of us reached for the doors. Bruce laughed. This is ridiculous. A little. I feel like if we get out. He looked through the windshield. The trip officially ends. I nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. He smiled. Good. Eventually we climbed out. The parking lot looked painfully ordinary. The same building. The same mailbox. The same tree outside my apartment. Everything exactly where I'd left it. Except I wasn't the same person who had locked that apartment door almost a month earlier. Bruce handed me one of my duffel bags. Need help carrying stuff? I've got it. You sure? I'm sure. He nodded. Then neither of us said goodbye. Instead, we both stood there awkwardly. Bruce rubbed the back of his neck. So, I laughed. We already used that one. I know. He sighed. I don't want to go back to only seeing you every couple of weeks. I answered without thinking. Then don't. He blinked. Don't? We made promises. I smiled. We're keeping them. A slow grin spread across his face. I like that plan. So do I. For a second we simply looked at each other. Then Bruce stepped forward and wrapped me in a brief hug. Nothing dramatic. Nothing uncertain. Just the kind of hug that said more than either of us had managed to put into words. When we stepped apart, he smiled. Dinner tomorrow? I was about to ask you the same thing. See? He laughed. We're already getting better at this. Life did return. Work started. My inbox became overwhelming again. Bruce disappeared into meetings, new projects, and impossible deadlines. But something remarkable happened. We didn't disappear from each other's lives. Tuesday dinners became normal. Saturday morning coffee became tradition. Sometimes we'd drive an hour just to try a restaurant someone recommended. Sometimes we'd sit in silence on a park bench after work because either of us felt like going home yet. The extraordinary trips slowly turned back into ordinary life. Except, ordinary life no longer felt ordinary. Bruce had been right. The big moments weren't what mattered most. It was grocery shopping together, complaining about traffic, arguing over playlists, helping each other carry heavy boxes, sending pictures whenever one of us found a ridiculous roadside attraction, making room for each other in days that used to feel too busy. The road trip had ended. The journey hadn't. About 6 months later, Bruce called me on a Friday afternoon. Busy tonight? Not really. Come outside. I frowned. Outside where? Your apartment. I walked to the window. There, parked beneath the same tree where our trip had begun, was Betsy. Still rusty. Still noisy. Still wearing the faded "No Bad Days" bumper sticker. I walked downstairs. Bruce leaned against the driver's door wearing the same prairie dog baseball cap he'd refused to throw away. You still own that? It has sentimental value. It has emotional plastic. He laughed. I taught you well. What are you doing here? Instead of answering, he tossed something toward me. I caught it. The little plastic prairie dog keychain. The one we'd bought on the 3rd day of the trip. I found mine this morning, he said. I figured you probably still had yours. I do. You know what today is? I thought for a second. Then smiled. 1 year. 1 year. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Finally, Bruce held up another folded paper map. No. He grinned. Pick a direction. I laughed so hard I had to lean against the SUV. You are unbelievable. I've been told. I unfolded the map, closed my eyes, and placed my finger down. Bruce looked, then started laughing. What? You picked Montana? I opened my eyes. No way. The exact same place. For a second we simply stared at each other. Then we both laughed. Not because it was fate. Not because it meant anything magical. Just because life sometimes has a wonderful sense of humor. Bruce folded the map. So, you coming? I looked at Betsy. At the open road waiting beyond the city. Then back at him. I don't really care where we're going anymore. His smile was quiet. Me either. And that was the moment I realized what the trip had really given me. It wasn't the mountains, or the ocean, or the endless highways. It wasn't the broken-down SUV, the tiny diners, the campfires, or the photographs from an old disposable camera. It was the certainty that home had never been a place on the map. Home was the person who made every ordinary day feel like the beginning of another adventure. Bruce had spent years teaching me to look around instead of always looking ahead. Somewhere along those miles, I had stopped searching for a destination. Because I'd already found the person I wanted beside me for every road still waiting. We climbed into Betsy. Bruce started the engine. It rattled exactly the way it always had. I laughed. She still sounds terrible. He smiled. Yeah. He glanced at me before pulling away. But somehow, she always gets us where we need to be. And together, we drove toward another horizon.